Was 536 CE the worst year in history? Thanks to massive volcanic eruptions, darkness spread across the former Roman Empire for 18 months. The Krakatoa eruption of 535 AD was part of a spike in volcanic eruption activity that continued for a decade. Some scholars even believe a comet struck the Earth, causing the 536 AD dust cloud. Whatever the exact cause, a fog blanketed Eurasia for over a year. Temperatures dropped, causing crop failures and massive famines. Across Eurasia, societies nearly collapsed. Irish chronicles lamented a failure from bread from the year 536-539. In China, 80% of the population starved. It snowed in Mesopotamia. And then a plague swept across the world, wiping out 15 million people. How did humankind recover after this devastating series of disasters? And how long did the recovery take? Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Cherny History channel. In 536 CE, an Icelandic volcano spewed enough ash into the air to block out the light in Europe for 18 months. According to Procopius, a Byzantine historian who witnessed the darkness, the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year. Additional volcanic eruptions in the 530s kept temperatures low for a decade. The volcanoes eventually stopped erupting, but the damage they caused lasted for years. The decade following 536 was the coldest on record for 2000 years, and it took until well into the 7th century for signs of climatic and economic improvements. The 6th century Byzantine writer John Leidos declared, "If the sun become dim, as happened in 536-537 for nearly a whole year, so what produced was depleted because of the bad time that predicts heavy trouble in Europe." In Rome, Cassiodorus wrote, "We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon." The volcanic eruption left a thick fog over Europe, what barely burned off during the day. Cassiodorus reported that seasons seemed to be all jumbled up together. After 18 months, the fog finally began to recede. Additional volcanic eruption in 540 and 547 kept temperatures low across Europe and Asia, but at least the dust well lifted. A climate crisis and famine followed the 536 volcanic eruption, ending millions, and then plague broke out in 541. The affected experienced delusions, fevers, and swollen lymph nodes, according to Procopius, who lived through the plague. Eventually called Justinian's plague, the disease claimed as many as 15 million people. The plague eliminated as much as 14% of Constantinople's residents in just 4 months before it burned out. While Constantinople recovered, the epidemic continued to appear across Europe and the Mediterranean world for several centuries. The same disease would return in the 14th century as the Black Plague. Over a year of darkness followed the 536 eruption of a volcano in Iceland. According to John of Ephesus, the sun was dark and its darkness lasted for 18 months. Each day it shone for about 4 hours, and still this light was only a feeble shadow. The fruits did not ripen, and the wine tasted like sour grapes. Average summer temperature in Central Asia dropped around 4 degrees. Crops didn't grow and famine quickly followed. The climate eventually recovered, but it took over a century. Today, Charles point to 536 is the beginning of the late Antique Little Ice Age, which lasted until 660 in Western Europe. During the dark years after 536, temperatures plummeted. In some areas, snow fell in summer, crops perished in the fields, and famine quickly followed. According to reports, crop in the field expired at an unseasonably time. Volcanic eruptions put more aerosols into the atmosphere when the devastating eruption of Tambora in 1815, which led to a year without a summer. But eventually the drift fell from the sky and slightly warmer temperatures returned. Unfortunately for those who lived through the year of famine and darkness, the only solution was to wait, hoping that food supplies wouldn't run out out before growing, thither returned. In the 7th century, Europe's economy began to recover from the upheaval of the 6th century. Long-distance trade increased, Europe's port town grew, and economic production became more specialized. The increase in economic activity also lines up with a shift from gold to silver coins. Europe saw an influx of new silver in the mid-7th century thanks to increased demand and more mining. Ice core samples show a spike in lead pollution in 640 and again in 660. What caused the increased pollution in the pre-industrial era? Silver smelt. In the mid-7th century, Europeans began smelting more silver from lead ore, releasing lead into the atmosphere. The founding of new silver mines in France illustrates Europe's recovery from the crisis of the previous century. According to archaeologist Christopher Lovelock, the increase of silver points to an important moment in the medieval economy driven by trade. It shows the rise of the merchants class for the first time, Lovelock explains. Emperor Justinian ruled the Byzantines from 527 to 565 CE. During his rule, Justinian faced famines, a devastating plague, and conflict to protect his territory on multiple fronts. Justinian fought to retake Roman lands in Africa and Italy. He also fought against the Sasanian Empire in the east. These entanglements plus the famines and plague reached the Byzantines to the breaking point, and after Justinian's passing, the empire again lost the territory he reconquered. But Justinian also made significant change to the Byzantine Empire, including initiating massive construction projects like the Hagia Sophia and critical reform of the legal system what shaped Mediterranean and European law for centuries. For a controversial ruler in this time, Justinian helped his empire weather the worst year in its history and survive until 1453. The climate change in the 6th century caused major famines from Ireland to China, but the change to the weather actually helped some areas. During the late Antique Little Ice Age, the Arabian Peninsula experienced great rainfall, what helped vegetation grow, which in turn provided food for more camels. According to a study in Nature Geoscience, larger camel heads may have facilitated transportation of Arab armies and their supples during the substantial conquest in the 7th century. Ancient Rome relied on gold coins. Augustus Caesar, who reigned from 30 BCE to 14 CE, originally declared that the empire would count 45 coins in each pound of gold. The value of the empire's coins there debased several times over the ensuing centuries, causing inflation and the price of gold to soar. After the crisis of the 6th century, Europe largely gave up on gold currency, while its inhabitants still traded gold coin from the Byzantine Empire. Most of Europe switched to a very localized method of silver coins. The less expensive silver coins better fit Europe's battering economy, which helped it continue to recover from the upheaval of the 6th century. In China, the famine of 536–538 CE killed 80% of the population. During this major crisis, quarreling states made recovery even more difficult. But in 581, the Sui dynasty united China. Though the Sui dynasty lasted only 2 emperors, it ended in 1618. It centralized the government and law reforms set China down a stable path for several centuries. The following era, the Tang Dynasty, would become another golden age for China. The Byzantines saw themselves as the true heirs to Greco-Roman culture. As a result, they devoted themselves to preserving classical knowledge. Byzantines created massive encyclopedias that collected classical, military, and medical texts. Without the Byzantines' passion for preservation, many of these sources might have been lost after the chaos of the 16th century famines and plagues. So, this is the Journey History channel, and sorry for my English.